The man behind scores of books, DVDs and CDs on how to be more effective and successful both at work and at home, Richard Bandler has helped thousands to live more effectively, enjoy greater success and lead happier lives through his seminar trainings. Today, Richard will be facing an audience eager to find out more about the man behind the mind. Hosted by broadcaster and presenter Paul Ross, Richard will tackle a range of diverse subjects from economics to why we fall in love in this exclusive face-to-face session.
Tonight something very special is going to happen. You're going to hear from the man who's been described as the guru of self-help, who is possibly the most influential man many people have never heard of. He has changed the way over the last 20, 30 years, the way we think about ourselves and about our relationship with other people. And he's here tonight to talk about many things, your questions, but also change, the kind of change apparently we can make within ourselves. Now, I am by no means an expert on NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, absolutely not. But I did train as a journalist. I'm naturally curious, downright nosy, so I'm fascinated to hear from the man who has changed the way we think about ourselves and every other human being we meet. It's about turning your life around, apparently. I want to find out more. It's about making a difference in your own lives and the lives of the people you love and the people you're going to meet. And one man's behind that. He is here with us tonight. Please make him welcome, Richard Bandler. Thank you. Sir, God bless. Take a seat, Richard. Now, as a journalist, and I did train as a journalist many years ago, we had the 5 questions, the who, what, where, when, why. Now, we know the where and the when, which is right now. The who is you. Why are we here? What's this about? What would you want to say to people? What's your background?
Well, my background started out years ago designing compiler systems, that is, getting computers so that they could imitate human behavior. And I was very fortunate enough to meet probably the most talented psychotherapist. Unfortunately, I met her first. And when she would do work, everybody would go, oh, she's just intuitive. But having studied the work of Noam Chomsky, we know that intuitions about language and other things have rules. And if you learn the rules, other people can imitate it. So I set out on a career of studying successful behaviors and teaching people to recapitulate them themselves. And I've been doing things from taking people who are crazy in mental hospitals and getting them to function in the real world, and getting athletes to perform better. I've worked with the military, the U.S. intelligence agencies, all kinds of people to be able to get them to use both conscious and unconscious things that are based on neurology, not mythology. Basically, I spent 4 decades trying to undermine the beliefs of psychology, which said there is something wrong with all of you.
So what I find fascinating is that, I mean, I've read a lot of self-help books. As you can tell, most of it hasn't worked for me. But some people's methods work. Is what you're saying, but some people seem to intuitively understand it. Other people haven't. You made a science of studying then what bits work.
When I started out, there was 150 different schools of psychotherapy, all screaming they had the right approach, when none of them could dependably at all help anybody with anything, which is a bad track record. But yet, there was a few gifted, talented people. There was a great hypnotist named Milton Erickson. There was Virginia Satir, a few others that were getting success, but they didn't really understand how they were doing it. They had descriptions which didn't match their behavior. I'm a modeler. I'm not a theoretician. I don't know why things work. I just pay attention to what does. Whereas a psychologist will get 100 people with phobias and try to figure out how they all got the same problem. I find 100 people who got over fears and found out what they did to get rid of it and go back and help the 100 people. That's my job.
Okay, now we've got a very appreciative and attentive audience here tonight. We've got lots of questions. You've not seen any of these, have you? So they're coming from all over the place, left field. I've got them in no particular order. What I'd like to do...
Especially now.
No, I know. You shuffle, I'll deal. Okay. June, can you give Richard your question, please?
Hi, Richard. Do psychiatrists and psychologists use or apply NLP techniques?
They certainly do now. And in fact, I have to be honest with you and tell you, if it wasn't for psychiatrists, I wouldn't have been able to do what I've done. That there was a group of very courageous psychiatrists that faced up to the fact that they weren't helping their patients, that had patients for years. Because when you went to a psychiatrist, the odds are it was a real long commitment. The belief was that change had to be slow and painful. And when couple of psychiatrists that I had met brought patients to me primarily to get me to hypnotize them and find out where their problems came from. And I don't really do that. I don't really care where they come from, because I think the best thing about the past is that it's over. And when I successfully helped a few of them, their clients, to get over fears, to get rid of phobias, and I did it in 30 or 40 minutes. I took a person who had, quote, hysterical paralysis and hypnotized him and moved it to the other leg, and then moved it to the psychiatrist's leg. Those kinds of things meant they started talking to each other, so they all started sending me clients. And instead of just taking what came through the door, I did it in groups. I took manic depressives altogether, although we call them bipolar now. And by going through groups and finding not so much what was wrong with them, but finding people that could do what they couldn't do. People who couldn't tell their fantasies from reality, I would find somebody who could and find out how they did it, and teach people who couldn't to be able to, and thereby get them out of mental hospitals and get them out of therapy and get them off of drugs and get them to function in the world and hopefully have happier days.
Does that mean, though, Richard, then that...
So the answer is yes.
Yeah, but thank you for that, June. Great question. Was there resentment from the medical establishment? Because, of course, if you're in therapy...
Hey, when I was 23, they called me absolutely crazy and out of my mind. And when I was 29, they said, well, maybe. And when I was 40... they were very interested, and when you're 50, you become eccentric, and when you're 60, then you're a guru.
Richard, you're never 50.
Yeah.
42, I'd have said.
22?
Can we hear now from, if you can raise your hand for us and stand up, Stephen Cleverden-Reed?
Richard, why is it, do you think, that something that clearly works like NLP phobia cure has not been taken up by general medicine?
Well, first thing we have to do is get it taught to general medicine. And Garnet Thompson, who is here, and some of his colleagues are teaching these things to doctors now, young doctors. A lot of psychologists use my techniques. Making it part of the curriculum would require that they violate my copyrights. So they'll have to ask my permission, which I'd be happy to give to them. But remember, a lot of these teaching institutions, the way in which we train psychologists, and the fact that psychologists are all made to do statistical studies, which is, and all of this stuff has been institutionalized. Our whole educational system has been way too institutionalized. It's not based on what you can accomplish. A PhD psychologist graduates without knowing anything about what to do when somebody walks in their door. You know, at least in medicine, you become a doctor and then you do 3 years residency. Well, you know, you become a psychotherapist, you have to go to seminars, you have to go out and then learn to do it. Those 4 years you spend getting a degree in psychology and another 3 getting a PhD, there isn't really hardly anything in it about what you do if there's somebody in your office going, "Blah!" You know, they just don't have any training that's designed to do that. And hopefully that's changing. You know, it's like now a lot of young psychiatrists are being taught what pharmacology is all about. We know a lot more about the brain. We can see it now. We have MRIs and PET scans, and we have electron microscopes. We know how neurocortical pathways are designed. So those of us that are at the forefront of creating behavioral technologies are the kind of people who are taking advantage of all of that. I personally, in this country alone, with Paul McKenna, have trained over 60,000 people in seminars. So it's out there, but most of them are keeping quiet about it because they're afraid they'll get fired.
Also, I mean, I've worked with Paul McKenna, I've seen Paul McKenna work on British TV, and it is remarkable in, what, 40, 50 minutes, people who've had a lifelong phobia, or think they have, they can combat that, they can get over that.
Not really, if you think about it. Most of them will report that they got their phobias in a few minutes. They fell off the side of a river and almost drowned, and their dad pulled them out, and they end up terrified of water. There's somebody in this room that was in a terrible thing. A bus blew up around her, right here in 7/7. It scared us just to watch it on TV. I was here when it happened. I saw it on TV, it scared the hell out of me. But being in one of the buses and surviving, and you know, after that she couldn't ride buses. You know, all kinds of things went on in her mind. But it, you know, it all happened. If you can learn to be that afraid in a few minutes, then I think you should be able to learn to not be afraid in a few minutes and change the way you think about things. The truth is, the nervous system learns better fast than it does slow. If I write stick figures on a deck of cards and go, you'll see the stick figure get up and dance. If I hand you one a week for 5 years, you'll have no idea what they're for.
It occurs to me, thank you for the question, Steve, it occurs to me that you talk about surgeons and medicine. Of course, surgeons, and it's not a quick fix because they study for years, but they can fix things. But for a long time, surgeons were regarded as secondary to doctors. They were almost like butchers, they were the poor relation. Do you think we're moving into something now where this idea of a quick mental fix will overtake some of the long, drawn-out therapies we've been
Well, I
we've been
think it
doing?
absolutely has for a lot of reasons. One are economics. Economics are on my side. I'm the guy that takes learning disabled kids and teach them to spell in 3 hours, not in 6 years. And these techniques, the more we discover, and this is going to be a big surprise to governments, but those of us that have incomes, we have to balance our checkbook at the end of the month. Otherwise, we get into trouble. We end up with credit card debt, and it snowballs. And, you know, it's one thing for a person to declare bankruptcy and they take away your house and car. It's another for a country to declare bankruptcy. And Barack Obama even said on public TV, I saw it myself, he said, someday we're going to have to learn to only spend as much money as comes in. Of course, he didn't say what day that was going to be.
OK, can we turn now to, no relation, sadly, Vicky Ross. Can you raise your hand, Vicky?
Right, Richard, you have run many seminars with Paul McKenna in the past. How
Yes.
much of what Paul has written in his books or used in his TV shows are NLP techniques that you have developed?
Quite a bit. But Paul always asks me first. In fact, before Paul writes a book, we have long telephone conversations. And he asks me a lot of questions, and I pretty much know it's going to end up in a book. Paul's like that.
And
But
he does credit you on his website all the time.
Hey,
doesn't he?
Paul gives me a lot of credit, and Paul and I have worked together for years. But, you know, Paul has disseminated to a lot of people a lot of information. Books like his book about getting confidence, I think is a really nice piece of work. And, you know, lots and lots of people have nowhere to start. And if you can read a book, I wrote a book a long time ago called Frogs into Princes. And when it came out, I got postcards from people. And that said they'd been in therapy for 6 years, and they had nobody could help them with their fear of heights. And they'd be writing me a postcard from the Grand Canyon, and they'd go, I read your book, for $8.95, my fear is gone. Thank you very much.
They weren't standing in the bottom of the Grand Canyon when they were...
No, they weren't.
Okay.
Hopefully. The ones that were on the bottom didn't send postcards. But Paul is, you know, has taken this and made it very public, which is a good thing. And, but a lot of the techniques that are in there, and a lot of the techniques in lots of people's books, by the way, even ones that don't give me credit, are my techniques. But, you know, I've spent 4 decades building behavioral technologies, and the technology to do that is the thing I know, which I haven't taught all of them yet.
Thank you, Vicky, for that. I hope that answers the question. Chris King. Where's Chris King, please? Lovely. Can we have your question, please, Chris?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Could you explain your involvement in the creation of Neurosonics and the Mind Spa?
And tell us what they are, first of all, for ignoramuses like me. Thank you.
Well, let me start with the neurosonics. The neurosonics technology was really sort of the brainchild of somebody named Paul Donner. Paul Donner, who also owns the Mind Spa company, wanted to be able to create a set of tapes that, and they were tapes in those days, now they're CDs, and pretty soon they're going to be downloads. But originally what we did is we went in and we constructed music, and underneath that music there's waveform resonance patterns, because when you pluck one string on the piano, others vibrate. So what we did is we measured states of consciousness, like alpha, and we found out when people are being creative, they're in an alpha state and they have high theta spikes. So we created a series of brainwave resonance patterns. They're way below human hearing. Probably only an elephant could hear them. And, but when these waveforms underneath nice music and with a double hypnotic induction and instructions about doing NLP patterns, there are 6 in them. One's called Designing Your Destiny, and one is about you know, having more passion in your life, and one's about being more determined and ferocious. This set of 6 was to see, for me at the time, I was getting more clients than I could deal with. And I wanted something I could give to these people, and I figured I could knock maybe 70 to 80% out before they got there. And then we went one step further, and that's where there were a lot of light sound machines that were supposed to put you into altered states. Unfortunately, one of the companies made medical claims that you could heal yourself with it. And suddenly, in America, they outlawed them all. You know, it was like overkill. And, but what we did is we did the same thing. We measured frequencies in the brain and designed a machine with light and sound that we could change those light patterns and get people from one state of consciousness. Some of the programs are designed to get you into alpha to RAC. Some are to increase your creativity. Some are to make you more ambidextrous in your physical movements and your thinking. There's one that's to wire you up, you know, better than cappuccino. And those are downloadable. And the machine itself is a tool to get you to be able to alter your state of consciousness. I mean, there are many ways to do that. Some people do it by taking drugs. Some people do it by meditating. People, as far as I know, from the beginning of time, have engaged in rituals of drumming and chanting and dancing to alter their state of consciousness. The technological age that we live in now, I want to make these machines not just things that stress us out, but things that teach us things. Like I have a little iPhone app out now, and it's a game you play, and you can only win by being really relaxed. It takes the accelerometer in the phone and measures the difference between conscious and unconscious movement. And instead of racing through a track getting all stressed out, you have to get really mellow and really still and really calm. In fact, it's called Be Still.
Thank you for that, Chris. Great question there. You mentioned there that these light box things were then banned or were prohibited. Have you had...
They were in the US for a period of time. They're not anymore.
I know in the past some people regard as pioneers, like Wilhelm Reich, for example.
That's a Reich machine. It's a slightly different device.
But
yes.
Again, have you encountered that? Have you encountered people having reservations or even thinking maybe what you're attempting to do with some of these new technologies is dangerous?
As far as I can tell, everything I've ever attempted to do, somebody somewhere has thought was dangerous. I went into an elementary school and took I think it was 8 or 10 of the most learning disabled kids in the school, and I took them for an hour for a week in a room and taught them things. For example, I taught them what good spellers do. They make pictures of the words where the letters are this big. And I taught them to look at a word, put it in their mind, and make it really big. And I taught them to make the letters all different colors so they could read it forwards and backwards. And I taught them how people actually multiply and how people actually add. And by installing these things inside their mind, and sent them back into class, and they went from being the bottom to being at the top. And the response of the teachers wasn't, gee, teach me to do that. It was, are you involved with Satan? And I guess if Satan's a good mathematician, I am. But other than that, I think that's a crazy response. There's always been some, because I've done some fairly outrageous things to help schizophrenics, you know. I mean, I have to admit, some of the stuff I did was pretty much over the top. But I had to do something over the top to get them off the edge where they were and back into being more sane. A lot of people, when I started doing hypnosis, they went, oh, hypnosis is bad, and it doesn't exist. So I've encountered that a lot, but not that much. I mean, you know, people think I've encountered tremendous resistance over the years. People who are scared run away, and people who are interested come closer. And there have been, as far as I can tell, more people that have been interested in what I'm doing than the ones that say it's a bad thing.
I've got a personal question now. I've obviously researched a bit for this and read a lot about you. What does DHE actually mean? What does it stand for? What does it mean?
It stands for Design Human Engineering. Neuro-linguistic programming, you take a mental strategy from one person and you put it in another. Design human engineering, you think of what would be a wonderful strategy. So instead of if somebody motivates themselves with a really strong, assertive voice in their head, in design human engineering, we put 300 of those in a choir. So it's kind of like being the interior designer of your own brain. You go in and make bigger movie screens and color and 3-dimension, and you make them panoramic. And so that the things you use to motivate yourself are actually better than anybody has ever used. Where NLP elicits strategies and installs them, design human engineering, you create them and install them. We use a lot of machinery to do it. We teach people to look at holograms and see them. We teach people to build magnifying glasses in their mind and use them to magnify things on the outside. What the brain is potentially capable of. My interest in hypnosis was because people could do things in trance that they couldn't do in the waking state. You could take somebody with high blood pressure and lower it. You could get people to be impervious to pain. They've even done open heart surgery with people just in a hypnotic trance because people were allergic to anesthetics and painkillers. The fact that a human body can do these things, that you can put somebody in a trance and age regress them back to 5, and they can read a book off their father's lap, tells me the brain can do these things. So what we need to do is to harness these things and be able to do them on purpose. And the name of that, by the way, is called thinking.
Thank you for that. Okay, it's told me. Is Bridget Clapham? Okay, Bridget, your question, please.
Hello, Richard.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. My question relates to what you were talking about earlier in terms of education. And when you run a seminar for teachers, what is the most important learning and change that you would wish for them to make?
I wish them to learn that intelligence is an activity, it's not a genetic gift. That there aren't smart kids and stupid kids, there aren't learning disabled kids. There are learning disabled teachers, however. It says it right on their door when you go to the school, learning disabled teacher, and I always think, how sad is that? But if teachers start, and this isn't just true about teachers, this is true about all educators and everybody involved in psychological arts. If you separate people from what they do, who they are from what they're doing, then it's very easy to teach them to do something else. Teachers, even more than psychologists, are sent in ill-equipped. We don't teach people, even the spellers in schools say Pahonics on the front of them. It's ludicrous that if you can't even spell phonetics phonetically. I mean, I went to Ireland and they spelled phone, F-O-N-E, and I thought, how cool is that? With teachers and teachers' classes, I say, how many of you have problems with lexdixia? And 70% of teachers don't even get the joke because they can't reverse things in their mind. But you see, if we equip teachers with the spelling strategies, not just spelling, art. I met an artist by the Thames who drew, and when I asked him how he drew a tree so perfectly, he said he saw his hand next to the tree. He imagined it, and then he had a wire from the hand he was imagining to the one on the paper, so that when the hand moved, he could trace things perfectly. When I taught a kid to do that, they were able to draw. When I was a kid in school, they just put a bowl of fruit in front of us and said, draw it. When I went to a baseball training camp, they handed us balls and said, throw them. Threw them at us and said, hit them. And if you just tell people what to do and not how to do it, then you're not really teaching them.
Thank you for that, Bridget. Okay, now, can John Hedge give us his questions? You raise your hand, John, so we can see what...
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
How do you think your work has influenced people like Darren Brown and Tony Robbins?
Well, it sure made them a lot of money. Tony Robbins for a while was a licensed trainer in NLP. Tony is a fabulous marketer and has turned lots and lots of people on to the idea. It's gotten a lot of people to face what they're afraid of by walking across hot coals. To me, I'm trying to get people to walk around them. I want people to be more intelligent. But Tony has definitely taken a small amount of what I've done and made it available to lots of people. I want more people to know about the wonderful things that I've discovered. And that's why I've made 50 tapes and written over 20 books and I'm published in all these languages. And, whereas Tony Robbins can't walk down the street because he's on TV in America all the time, I can. So if Tony will take care of that problem, then I'm a happy camper. But I've had Deepak Chakra in seminars. I've had all kinds over the years. I've been doing this for 4 decades. So at some time or other, most of the people that are doing things that are effective in any way at all have dabbled in the kind of work that I've done. They've read my books. Tony gives me credit for things in his books. Lots of people do. And to me, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I do like that footnote with my name on it now and then, though. I have to admit, I'm partial to that.
Thank you for that, John. Thank you for a good question there. Where's Matt Wingett? Matt?
Question?
Answer. That was quick. Next.
Thank you, Matt.
Why do you so often use humour in your teaching?
I always use what?
Humour in your teaching.
Well, call me silly, but I think when people are enjoying themselves, they learn better. It's just I noticed that all species of animals play when they're young as part of the learning process. And I've discovered if I inject humor into my teaching, that what people learn, they remember and use more often. And I think it has to do with neurochemistry. that when you're smiling, it releases serotonin into the brain. When you're having fun and laughing, oxytocin is in your brain. Now, when we take autistic children and we artificially give them oxytocin, they begin to recognize what facial expressions mean, rather than avoiding everything. It seems to be something that allows the brain to pattern better, which is how we learn. It flips the cards by faster and allows you to build new cortical connections, so you don't just get stuck in old behaviors.
That's fascinating, because Gurdjieff, who was admittedly had a very mystical overlay, but who used Sufi teachings, used a hell of a lot of humour in his presentations.
Yeah, there's nothing like endorphins to get people to be receptive.
Okay, thank you for that, Matt. Good question. Apologies if I mispronounced this person's name. Is it Huri or Houri Papin? Yes. Thank you.
Do you believe there's an emotional cause to physical disease, and whether that part of the body that's having the disease is reflecting that emotion?
I think that's way too simple. Way too simple. I caught a cold once, and I think that's because I got kissed by somebody with a cold. And so I don't think that had anything to do with emotions, except maybe being a little too horny. I think that we know beyond a doubt that stress makes things worse. And that there's a real sophisticated relationship between certain kinds of stress and certain kinds of illnesses. And it was very nice. The American Medical Society even admitted it in 1955. But I also think the inverse is true, that health is connected with being happy and feeling good. But to say that, this emotion affects this organ, I've heard this from Chinese medicine, I've heard it from a lot of places. It doesn't prove out in my experience to be, there may be general patterns through the population, but I think to try to narrow it down like that probably isn't going to turn out to be accurate in the end. I think it's going to be infinitely more complex than that.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Huri. Is Dr. Khalid Khan with us? If you can just wait for the microphone for us, Doctor.
Hey, Doc, what's on your mind?
Irish, a question about modelling, if I may.
A question about modelling.
Health professionals, we often come across people who've done very well with severe crippling diseases. They've come out of them, they've gone into remissions and so on.
Yeah, that spontaneous remission thing, isn't that a real knuckle buster for most doctors? People getting well on their own, we hate that. Yeah, and your question is?
Yeah, my question is, for people who do well in those sort of situations, could you give some tips on how we can model how they've recovered from those? So we can
well, it seems to me, in my experience, that it has a lot to do with people's beliefs. That people who believe they're going to get better have a tendency to get better. And, it's not 100%, but it sure seems to pan out. Surgeons have told me that they almost know who's going to make it through surgery and who isn't by their belief in it. That when people believe they're going to make it, they're just more likely to. And our belief that we can get better lines up our conscious and our unconscious activity. It's like even the thing about believing that a pill is going to make you well. When I did the placebo project, which probably some of you don't know about, I had this crazy idea to put out a pill called placebo and to publish with it the research demonstrating how well placebos work. So if you look up headaches, and 8 out of 10 times a placebo works as well as a painkiller, so you'd take 11 just to be safe. And of course the pharmaceutical people and doctors said, no, 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 this won't work. Placebos only work because people are deceived. And I don't think that's true. I think they work because people believe. So since they wouldn't let me make fake placebos, I used to give people grapes and convince them that if they swallowed one of these grapes every day, that they would be healed faster, and that they would recover. I gave people grapes and told them when they went off of heavy drugs like heroin, that every time they started to go through withdrawal, to look at this thing and believe as much as the sun is coming up tomorrow that this grape would soothe their body and make it so they wouldn't feel withdrawal. And literally, people would come and they'd come back to me and they'd go, I need some of your grapes. And I'd go, they sell grapes at the supermarket. And they go, no, I need the grapes that you gave me. Because they believed the fact that I had done something magic to the grapes. They were just grapes. I even told them they were just grapes. But in their mind, they made this belief and it helped them. So I try to get doctors, when you give people pills, make sure they believe they're going to work. When you do a treatment, no matter what kind of treatment you do, whether it's acupuncture, any kind of healing, if you start out finding out from people what they believe the most, like the sun is coming up tomorrow, even though we're in England, it still comes up.
Steady.
I saw it today for a few minutes. And I asked somebody what that bright thing in the sky was, and they said, oh, that was summer. But to me, this is the importance. What I've discovered from people, because I have all of these cases of people who got over things like cancer, and one of them, I think, was just absolutely outrageous. They told this family to take the grandfather home. They set up a hospital bed, and they said it would be better if he died at home, but they didn't tell him. So he got home, and 3 weeks later, he started getting out of the bed. And then 6 weeks after that, he started going in the backyard. And 2 months later, he's gardening. And the family finally call up the doctor, and they go, how long is this going to go on? And he went, how long what? And they went, our grandfather's in the backyard gardening. And, and he's not taking his medicine, and we don't understand. And the doctor said, bring him in. And he went in, and he'd had remission from what should have been terminal cancer. There's an NLP trainer named Barbara Stepp, who was told that she was going to die by a psychic doctor in less than 6 months. She had skin cancer. And she came in and misunderstood what I said. I tried to get people to look prettier by using hypnotic age regression. I noticed when I hypnotically age regress people over and over again, they looked younger. So I picked the 3 people in the audience that looked the worst, and she was one of them, brought them up, age regressed them, and had her go look in the mirror, and she just didn't look sick anymore. And she went home and did it every day herself. And, this was 30 years later. She's still alive. In fact, she went to her doctor's funeral.
Thank you, Dr. Cully Khan there. Garner Thompson. Where's Garner Thompson?
Richard, you've met many brilliant and innovative people in your time. Who stands out as particularly influential to you in terms of your work and your approach to it, and how?
Well, they were all influential. All the really bright people like Buckminster Fuller and a lot of people, they all influenced me differently. Certainly, the work of Milton Erickson influenced me really intensely for a couple of reasons, because Milton got results that nobody else could get. And unlike most hypnotists that had all the rules about how you did hypnosis, Milton did everything covertly and under things. He took a lot longer than I'm willing to take. But he never believed that you couldn't take the most dysfunctional person in a mental hospital and get them to have a real life on the outside. And whether somebody was in a hospital completely delusional, they had patients that spoke absolute word salad, crazy as a loon, and they'd come in and talk word salad for 2 sentences, he'd speak 2 sentences back, and then they'd talk to him for 4 hours like that, and he'd talk to them for 4 hours back. He had an infinite amount of patience, but he had this belief that you could help anybody. And to me, that's one of the most important things. I actually didn't like him very well. Him and I did not get along. He liked me even less. But he understood that what I was doing would make his work available to more people. And what I understood is that he could teach me more about impacting people, both consciously and unconsciously.
Thank you for that, Garner. Fascinating answer there. A couple of slightly handbrake turn now, if you don't mind, Richard. A couple of quite specific questions with a sort of medical leaning. So I don't know how
yes,
far.
Okay, I'll try to be more serious.
Okay, the first one is from Tiffany Banks.
I was told that basically the only way that I can have a child is by IVF. And I was basically wondering if NLP can help me to prove the doctors wrong.
Okay, the first thing is NLP is not alive. Okay, there is no such person as NLP. The technology of NLP certainly can help you. Garner Thompson here has done this over and over and over again. And for a gay guy to get as many women pregnant as he has is a real miracle.
Don't stand too close to him, Tiffany. That's all we're saying.
Yeah. So you might want to chit-chat with him after the course, because all people who get into NLP, or at least a lot of them, have a tendency to focus for a while on one of these impossible problems. And whenever a doctor tells you that there's no hope, there's only one way something can be done, the loss performative kicks in. As far as he knows, that's probably true. But as far as the universe knows, there's an infinite number of possibilities that haven't been thought of. Fortunately for you, there's some that have been. And so the trick is to find the right person to do the right thing. When you go to somebody and they say, I cannot help you, sometimes they pronounce it like this. They go, you can't be helped. And your brain has to go as far as you know, and then look for somebody who has a better answer.
Good luck with that, Tiffany, and God bless. I've come to the end of the written questions. I don't know if anybody else has got a question that's not on the list, if you just want to raise...
The lady in orange has one. I know she is...
Okay, if we can get the lady at the back first, we'll come to you in a second, madam.
Michelle Paradise. Hi, Richard.
What was your name again?
Michelle Paradise.
I love your name.
So do I.
Yes,
Thank you.
Miss Paradise.
Thank you. How can NLP techniques help people with destructive addictions?
Well, I've worked a lot with very addictive personalities. As I started to become more famous, one of the first crews of people to come in were rock musicians who have very addictive personalities. What I found out is that this falls in the category of people who make really bad decisions even when they know better. And people who are in addictions, whether it's drinking or taking drugs or overeating or all the myriads of other addictions that aren't making the decision when they look down at a line of cocaine and all they think about is, if I snort this, I'll feel good. They don't run a long enough movie. They don't run through the 3,000 lines and losing their wife and not being able to see their kids and getting kicked out of the band and being homeless with a shopping cart and passing out in an alley and having somebody piss on them. That if you run a little bit longer movie, sometimes you don't do that. The other thing is when people are kicking drugs, when they quit smoking and when they're dieting, when they get hungry or they start to get the jitters, they think, because it always has, means they're supposed to take the drug to feel better. Instead of getting in their mindset, I'm going through withdrawal. I got to do this for 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, I'm going to be a free person. And every time it feels worse, you go, I must be doing exactly the right thing. I have trouble with the whole Alcoholics Anonymous thing, that once an addict, always an addict. I think the cure for me, and when I've worked with serious alcoholics, I take them out at the end and make them drink. And then, because if they are out of control, I haven't really helped them. I think real control is being able to do something and say no and stop. And, I told a reporter once, and it was probably a big mistake, that when I was younger, I took some drugs, and one day I decided not to and just stopped. And he, of course, the newspaper said, Richard was a drug addict. Not really. I'm an addictive personality, but I'm also Jewish, and I don't like spending money on things. Drugs were just way too expensive. Cigarettes, the same thing. They raised the price of cigarettes, that got me to quit. But when I quit, I didn't really go through a lot of pain because my brain, I made a decision that I was going to quit. And then when I felt like I wanted a cigarette, I went, I'll never have to feel this way again. And after I do it, it would just disappeared really fast. My mother did the same thing, and I've helped lots and lots of people to get through really bad addictions. Heroin, which is one of the worst. Methadone is absolutely the most addictive thing I have ever helped somebody out of. I've never seen withdrawal like people have from methadone. Heroin, nothing compared to methadone. Terrible drug, and they give it to people instead of heroin. So they give you something that's not as pleasant, but 10 times more addictive, but it's sold to you by a corporation instead of some guy at the end of the street. To me, you don't replace one addiction with another. You get people to get control of their neurology and have a little determination. Little determination, you can beat any addiction.
Is Jackie Davis around? Can she raise her hand if she's in the house?
I believe I've heard you say that love never has a happy ending.
No, that's not what I said. I said all love stories end in tragedy because if you're truly in love, unless you both die in a plane crash together, one of you is going to go first. And to me, that understanding that is part of what gives people, when they're sad, something, if they realize that this is a part of it. That if they didn't really love the person, they wouldn't be sad when they die. And when you understand that this is the risk you take to fall in love, it becomes very worth it. If you get 30 years of deep love with somebody or 2 weeks of deep love with somebody and you miss them terribly because something tragic happens, when you understand for it to be a true love story, it's going to end in tragedy. Some way or another. This happens, you love your parents and eventually, your parents will die. There are all kinds of tragedies that are like this. But, this is part of what happens when you love somebody. And when it happened to me, when I lost somebody that I had been married to for many, many years, it was Robert Anton Wilson that wrote me a letter. And a lot of people were trying to console me, and I was pretty inconsolable. I was ready to go to heaven and kill God myself. But Robert Anton Wilson wrote me a letter, and he said, you know, that he had found these words comforting to him. And I found them very comforting to me. It's when you lose something important, you can't lose sight of the fact that it was. And for me, it allowed me to focus on what I got to enjoy and stop thinking about the bad ending. When you ask me, is it possible, the answer is always going to be yes. I may not know exactly how to do it, but it doesn't mean it can't be done.
It's a fantastic positive note, Turner. Thank you for your questions. Thank you all for your questions. Can we please have a huge round of applause for Mr. Richard Bandler for his time this evening as expertise. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks very much. Richard Bandler.
Richard is always entertaining and often challenging, and he's left the audience with a lot to think about.
I've tried the hypnotherapy on certain things and it's helped me enormously. And now I'm adding the NLP side of things, so I've seen a natural growth in all what I do.
Yeah, so I've never been to an evening like this before, so I didn't really know what to expect. And, you know, well, basically I was quite blown away by it all on the whole, and the way the man sort of broke everything down and explained it to, you know, a vast audience and simplified things in a sense was very interesting, should we say.
I definitely, when I came here, I didn't know what to expect, and I really thought Richard was fantastic. It just shows you we can achieve whatever we want to, and if we get hold of our problems, you know, when we recognise it, we can solve them and do it in a very humorous way as well. So yes, I really enjoyed it, and I will be in contact with Richard as soon as possible.